Hi there folks, Glenn here, the People's Carpenter. Glenn Peoples is my name. You know, when I first decided to call this channel the People's Carpenter, I thought, that sounds like a communist name. And so I went with all this Soviet imagery about the People's Carpenter with hammers and sickles and stars because I thought it looked cool, but I didn't go with that. I didn't want to give anyone the wrong impression. I am a popper, and I have been for a few years now. A grandfather. Popper Peoples is what I am called by my grandson. He has a small dining table where he sits and eats his dinner, and it's really ugly. It looks like this. So I think we should do something about that. I want to make him a nice one. In fact, I'm in the process of doing that now. Why don't you see how it's done? Among the various pieces of wood that I bought to help our builder clear some space, the person who extended my workshop, was this, made from rimu. It's made from several pieces of rimu glued together. I assume it is because it looks like an offcut from a longer bench top. It's that kind of thing. That's my guess anyway. But it's just slightly larger than what I will use for this table, which makes it perfect. The frame will come out of my stash of very recycled rimu, which still has all those nail holes in it, but no nails, so I won't have to pull the nails out, and I think the nail holes will give it a nice recycled character. I've machined 5 pieces, 4 legs. Now why 5? Tables only have 4 legs. They do, but the thing is, although I'm getting good at this, I'm not perfect, so I'm allowing for the possibility that I'll ruin one. Milled up a bunch of smaller pieces for the aprons and the stretchers, and if you don't know what those are, I'll show you. So I've milled up all my pieces, and I can see that I've made a slight mistake, but I don't think it'll matter. The mistake is that I've rounded over all of the pieces when in fact there are some edges that would have been better to leave 90 degrees, but I can work with this, that's fine. I've created 5 legs, it's good to have a spare, and I've created some pieces that will be used for the skirts, also known as the apron. The apron is the rail that connects to the top of the legs, and the apron together with the legs at each corner forms the rectangle on which you will place the tabletop and some rails, and those connect the legs further down. So what I'm going to, and this is really the main point of this build for me, technically, the main technical thing that I have to do is join the aprons and the rails to the legs, and I'm going to be using mortise and tenon joinery. And I had to think carefully about this because, so you got your leg sitting like this. Let's say for me that's the front left leg, it's on your right obviously, meaning the table top is over here. That means, and these are not cut to length yet, that means I'm going to have two apron pieces going in that way, so they'll be meeting there. And I had to think about how the tenons were going to meet, because it might have been that they were going to clash with one another, and I was going to have to consider how I could make them overlap. And that's certainly possible. There are methods of doing that. I've been consulting with Mr. Knoll, Terry Knoll, in this book that I mentioned earlier in this channel, the Joint Book, and there is a method of making tenons to overlap, and that is by cutting the top or bottom half off each one so they can overlap thus if they need to. But I could do that, and I was thinking about doing that. So as part of my planning, I drew on the top of, and bear with me while I get my reading glasses, these are small pieces. I drew on the top of the leg just to show me where the tenons will be placed based on my current thinking. So if the tenons don't overlap, they'll look like that, and actually I think that's probably okay. They may not need to overlap after all. I think that could be sufficient, or am I just saying that because I'm making my life easy? No, actually I think I did, because this is a fairly small leg, and if the tenons overlapped, I'd have to be cutting into the leg all the way over there, which means that I would be removing wood to make a tenon that way and removing wood to make a tenon that way, and they would almost reach the surface on the other side, and that's just kind of too much wood to be removing from a fairly slim leg like this. So I think I will not have them overlap. I'll just have one tenon going in there, one tenon going in there. They'll touch at the corner, but that's all they'll do. I initially did relish the challenge of making them overlap, but I would be doing it just for the sake of it. In practical terms, not really necessary, so I won't do it. On a future project I'll get more clever and do that. Okay, so right, I won't cut the mortise all the way to the top of the piece, because the mortise is going to have to go there and another one will have to go there. I won't cut them all the way to the top, leaving an open top. That would make the joint slightly looser. I think because these pieces are quite small and I do want a decent sized tenon, I will probably make the tenon as wide as this piece is. Yeah, so I won't be cutting any shoulders on either side of the tenon, but I will be cutting cheeks on the front and back of the tenon like that. Okay, so I'm partly planning as I go. I've partly planned this already, as you can see. And the order is, I don't know how important the order is. Do you make the mortise first and then the tenon first? But what I can see is that there is a consensus of other woodworkers making the mortise first. And their reasoning is, once you've made the mortise, it's easy to gradually adjust the size of the tenon down to fit inside the mortise. So I'll just do that because I trust people who have been doing this for a lot longer than I have. So these pieces are 44 by, I believe it was 22. Yeah, 44 by 22. And there are people who have rules about how thick a tenon should be relative to the piece, in this case the apron. And normally I might follow those rules, but I also, this is quite a thin piece, and I don't want the tenon to be too thin because I don't want it to easily snap off or anything like that. So I've made it fairly thick relative to the thickness of the piece. So this is 22 millimeters thick, and I've decided that the cheeks on either side of the tenon will only be 4 millimeters, and so therefore the tenon itself will be 14 millimeters thick. Now it's not going to go all the way to the top, that's something that I've decided, so I'm going to be a little bit on the arbitrary side about how much to remove from the top of the tenon, and I'm just going to remove 10 mils because why not? Which means that my resulting mortise will be 14 millimeters by 34 millimeters. Okay, let's lay some things out. So this is where it would have been better not to round over, so I can easily measure from the edge, but I'll set my square there. So there's my mortise. Now, it pays to then lay things out with a marking knife. Or alternatively, marking gauge. Not everyone has one. A marking knife is okay if you're very careful, but you can also use a marking gauge. Now I've already cut that line, so no point in doing it again. Now what you can also do, I'm not going to do it just here, you can use a mortise gauge, which has a couple of cutters, so that you can lay out both sides of the mortise at once. And that's rather nifty. I would probably be inclined to use that for a larger piece of work rather than something small and fiddly like this. But just because I can, why not use this for one of the lines? Cut. I know this is not the most traditional way, but when I'm not doing a mortise that goes all the way through the piece, the easiest way to remove the bulk of the material is using a drill press. So the mortise is going to be 14 millimeters wide, so I didn't want to get too close to that because my aim might not be flawless, so I've got a 12.5 millimeter drill bit in here. And I've set the depth stop so that it will go no deeper than the required depth of the mortise. Perfect. Right, I'll do that for all 4 legs, and then I will come back with my chisel. Okay, so I'm not actually chopping out a mortise with a chisel. The mortise is mostly hogged out with the drill. I'm just going to be refining the edges and taking off the excess bits. I've got a narrow chisel for the ends, 12 millimeters, because the mortise is 14 mils wide, and my largest chisel 25 millimeters for the long sides. And remember, you don't actually need a vise to chisel out a mortise. So if your vise is like mine, and if you start hitting things hard, you would start sinking down into it, just clamp it to the top of your bench. That will be perfect. what I've been finding is that when it comes to cutting with the grain on the long sides of the mortise, I'm not using my hammer at all. It's just as easy to pare it down by hand. Easier, I should say, not even just as easy. It can be far more precise. Well, I've made my mortises, and now it's time to start cutting some tenons, and that means it's time for an unboxing, because I have some really nice chisels now, which is essential to hand joinery. But the other thing that is essential to hand joinery is a couple of saws, which I bought a little while ago on Etsy. Okay, so this is, I don't know what year it was made. Looks vintage. I like to think of it as vintage. Certainly it's got marks on it that suggest it's fairly old, although it's in good condition. A dovetail saw for cutting dovetails, and as well as that, a tenon saw. Now these are both made by Spear and Jackson, who are well known for making fine saws. They both have the SJ logo on them. Now these are both variations of a rip saw. Just let me double check. The only difference between a dovetail saw and a tenon saw is that the dovetail saw is typically slightly smaller and has finer teeth, a larger number of teeth per inch or points per inch, which means that this is the dovetail saw and the brass backed one is the tenon saw. It's a while since I ordered these, so I had to think about it. Yeah, but this is the dovetail saw. I don't know how many teeth per inch they have, but I can see that this has more teeth per inch, just because they're pretty similar, and this one is shorter. Typically, from what I read, a tenon saw will have between, say, 8 and 14 teeth per inch, and a dovetail saw will usually have between, say, 12 and 15, so there's a large area of overlap. They're quite similar saws, and you could use one to do the job of the other in many situations. But just because it is the proper use of a tenon saw, I will use the tenon saw to cut the tenons in this case. But these look nice. First time I've seen them since ordering them some months ago, because they've been in their packages waiting for the big reveal, which is right now. So I will start with the short pieces that will go on either side of the table. 2 of these will be for the apron at the top, and the other 2 will be for the stretchers down below. Initially they'll all be the same, the tenons will all be the same, and then, as you may recall, for the apron I'll cut a notch into the top part of the tenon. So I'll do them all the same initially. And they are going to be 25 millimeters long. There we go. I'm obviously trying to err away from that line so much that I've actually messed up the cut. Erring on the side of caution though, so I haven't taken off more than I need to. I've just taken off far less than I should have. Normally you wouldn't cut across the grain with a tenon saw, but it's a very small cut. testing for thickness, and no, it's still too thick there, which is good. I want it to still be too thick and not too thin. Paring a tenon is satisfying, seeing that wood curl up like so. Right, that is ready to squeak on, I believe. Because it's moving in the vise, it's not going on perfectly. I can see it is starting to split a little, so I'll take it out and I'll pare it back just a little bit more. Okay, and that's good. Even though it went on quickly, I can feel that it is having to push through. It is making good contact there, and I don't want it any looser than that. So that's it. Now, you might look at that and think, oh, it's not making good contact. That's because of the round over. It looks like it's not making good contact. I might actually just sand that shoulder there so it looks like, well, no, not so that it looks like, so that they're both slightly rounded over. I think that would be more aesthetically pleasing. But that is how you make a tenon, if you're slow. Now, just one comment. You'll notice that I'm pairing each tenon to fit into a specific mortise, because although they're pretty much all the same dimensions, they're not identical. So what I've done already is I've marked each piece. So this is piece number 2, and then for the stretchers initially, and then later for the aprons, that is 2 outside. So that is the outside face that goes into piece number 2. In fact, I'll also put a little S there so that I know that that is the stretcher and not the apron, and I don't alter that tenon later to make it into an apron. So I've drawn a line 10 millimeters into the tin, which is what I'm going to remove. To make that cut, I'm not going to use any of my new old saws, because, well, those are rip saws, which means you cut down the grain, whereas this is across the grain. So I'm using my small Japanese crosscut saw, also known as a kataba, which is a Japanese pull saw with teeth on only one side and no spine. Doesn't matter if I remove ever so slightly too much, you won't see how much I've actually removed. This will just enable the tenon to go into that shorter mortise at the top of the leg. Just like that. Slide on in. Now, while that isn't quite going all the way in, I just need to remove a bit more of that tenon there, but you see the idea. I've really got my desk, my bench, facing the wrong way. I've got the vise on that side because I think the vise looks good, but really the vise should be here so I can stand here and work using it. Because when I want you to see me working with the vise, I bring the camera around here and the lighting isn't as good. The lighting's much better where you are right now. Anyway, I've got the left side of this desk all done. Well, all done, but you know, the basic joinery is built. Now it should all go together. Let's find out if it does. And there we are. new day. I finished the sides last night, and now I just need to put the tenons on the long pieces, and then we'll have a frame. I'm going to try something different, because although that sawing is going okay, I prefer chiseling to sawing, I'm discovering. So I'm going to do something different. Not different from the world of woodworking, I'm sure this has been done, but different from what I have been doing. I'm just going over those knife lines, and I'll make them a fair bit deeper with the chisel. Oh, I've already done it on that side. And now what I will do is, instead of trying to saw down to the line, I will now just start paring the tenon from the beginning instead of cutting with the saw. Yeah, I enjoy that a lot more. Chisel work is becoming very satisfying. Okay, a couple of these tenons are wobblier than I would like, but once I've glued everything up, I think we'll be okay. That's not bad. Now I'm going to have to take it apart and sand it up, make all the pieces look nice. That's going to be a bit time consuming. Just coating the inside walls of the mortise with glue. Good, okay. Watch this space, there will be more of these to do. I've got some 2-part epoxy glue, which is what I'm going to use to glue these long pieces in, just because wood glue might be okay, but I'm just aware that they are slightly looser, the tenons in the mortises. So I'll use this because it does, to some extent, fill gaps as well. It is together. Any squeeze out that I can see, I'll grab it now while things are still soft. I don't have quite as many of these clamps as I would like, only 2 actually. So I'll just position that there. That should do us fine. Just checking that everything appears to be as I want it, because when I come back tomorrow I do not want to be trying to take things apart and correct them. But that looks good. That looks great. So I guess that means I've got the joinery aspect of this build done, and that's because I'm using a pre-made laminated piece for the top. Now I'm probably going to reduce that size a little bit, but in the next video I'll deal with the top and getting that into its final shape and attaching it, which is pretty important. Until then, stay safe out there, kids.